Hey everybody, Bob here and welcome to another Making Stuff video. Today I'm going to be working on the CNC Plasma Table and I'm going to hook up all the electronics, get Linux CNC configured and hopefully get the X, Y, and Z axis all moving and working. There's a lot to do, so let's get started. Okay, so I've got this old circuit board that I bought several years ago. This is from my old CNC project. And it was a kit and I had to solder it together. And if you notice, it has an X, a Y, and a Z axis, but the A axis, the fourth axis, isn't populated. Well, luckily I've got a kit that I can solder on here to populate this axis, and that the A will be the second motor on the Y for the gantry. Because if you remember, the gantry has a motor on each side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to solder all of the components in the circuit board and set it up and test it and make sure everything works. And then I'll have everything on this circuit board. And you may have noticed that it's got the parallel port in and it has the drivers on the board. Now some of these breakout boards, they'll have the parallel port and then they'll just have all of your pins broken out, and then you have to use a separate driver for each motor, and that's just something extra that you've got to buy. And this board's rated at 3 amps per channel here, or axis, and that's more than enough to operate the plasma table. So this will work out great, and it won't cost me any extra money to get set up. Okay, so I've got the larger heat sink all hooked up to the board here. I've got the A axis, I've got all the components populated on the board. I've got the motors hooked to the A and the Y axis. Then up here, I've got the proximity sensors hooked up to this relay board. So it's all set up and configured in Linux CNC. So I'm going to try a homing procedure on the gantry and let's see how well it works. All right, so I've got this all set up. It's ready to do my first test run. Now I've got the A axis hooked up to this motor and rail, and then over here on the other side, I've got the Y axis hooked up over there. I've got the proximity sensors all set up. Now on the homing process, what it's going to do is I've purposely set the gantry where it's not in square. So this motor will home to the proximity sensor first, and then this one will go second. And what it's going to do is this one down here, it'll home, and what it'll do is it'll come forward, it'll trip that sensor, and then it'll wait for this one. Then this one's going to come forward, and then when it trips, what'll happen is the Linux CNC is going to back off and then go forward on the switch, and then at that point the gantry should be square. Now if it's not square, I'll have to do some adjustment by moving one of these proximity sensors, making an adjustment to get it square. So I'm going to fire it up here on Linux CNC and let's see what happens. There we go. Now it's square in theory. I may have to make some adjustments to it, but everything should be all lined up and ready to go. Okay, so I've got the gantry all hooked up. It's homed. So in theory, it should be squared. I can do some more testing with that later, but for now, I'm going to jog the gantry this direction, and then I'm going to have it come back this direction. And then down here in the bottom of the screen, when it comes back this direction, it should stop when it hits that proximity switch as the limit. So let's try that and see what happens. And it is moving forward. And let's bring it back the other direction. And it stopped. Okay, so that's great. Everything is working. It looks like the card is all set up. I've got Linux CNC configured correctly. So now it's time to start working on the X and the Z axis. All right, so if you remember in the last video, I said this motor was just for fit. It's actually, I think it's a little too small, but it would probably work for a CNC plasma. But I got this motor, and you can see it's much bigger. It's got the same torque rating as the other motors. It's actually the same exact motor as the others. So this one should work pretty good, and it should be able to handle anything that this Z-axis can throw at it. So let me get that wired in, and then I'll be ready to continue with the build. So before I run the cables for the X and the Z axis, I need some cable chain to keep everything nice and neat. So I've been 3D printing these, all of these little links, and my 3D printer's been running overtime here. So I've got about 60 of them, and when they all assemble and go together, they look something like this. And this will keep all of those wires nice and neat. So now I need to go through and just assemble everything.
Okay, so I've got everything hooked up here. I've got my cable chain hooked up. I've got the bigger motor on the Z-axis, and they're just temporarily wired in there for now so I can do some testing. So I think what I'm going to do now is load some G-code and just see what happens.
So that's all the time I've got for now. If you like the video, please give me that big thumbs up, and also subscribe and hit that bell so you're notified of upcoming videos. And if you like this video, I've got all the videos in the series in a playlist, and there's a link in the description to that playlist. So check all of those out so you don't miss any of the videos in this series, and thanks for watching.